Does anyone have a question?
I did. I had questions, Hannah, about trickle up. I'm not understanding how it works so much. I like the idea, I really do, and it resonates with me. But I don't see how it is supposed to come to fruition more, because it just seems like an uphill battle.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a very difficult question, right? Because the majority of the faces and the stories that we hear in the animal rights movement and in the LGBT movement are the people, you know, they're like married, like gay and lesbian people with families and, you know, dogs and cats and orcas and like, you know, majestic, beautiful creatures, you know. And so how do we get people to care about... Well, first of all, I'd also like to bring up that I think it's very important for people in the animal rights movement to incorporate human animal rights into our advocacy. And so I think that we really need to be like talking about food justice and talking about farm worker rights and how materials for foods and goods are sourced and how they're produced and who we're paying and how much we're paying them and all that kind of stuff. And so I think that it's pretty tough. I really think that it's hard, you know, it is really hard for people to have empathy for like mice and for fishes and for trans women of color. And I just think, but I think that part of the thing that we can do is really, you know, just trying to share about you know, these individuals' families and what they care about and what, you know, their lives, and just have it not be all tragedy. But I think it's definitely, you know, it's definitely an uphill battle.
Are there any resources on Trickle Up that I could look at? I'd like to look at it a little bit more.
Well, I would look, I'll try and come up with, if we can exchange contact, and I'll send you a list, but definitely Dean Spade is kind of the gateway to a lot of really amazing activist projects and things like that. The Sylvia Rivera Law Project, for instance, does a lot of work with low-income queer and trans people of color, legal advocacy. The Audre Lorde Project is really good. I think any sort of animal liberationist, total animal liberation, we are acknowledging all non-human animals. You know, that kind of thing. I mean, I do see that as a trickle up type of approach.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering, kind of in the same area, if there needs to be a difference in the approach. Just, I think the idea makes a lot of sense to trickle up, and I really, really like the connection of it. But, you know, when we think about mainstream, like married gay couple with children versus, you know, trans woman of color in a poly relationship. And then on the other hand, you know, apes or cats and dogs versus chickens, cows, pigs, there isn't this, you know, this problem of use and humans getting very caught up on like, well, you know, we're using these animals. They've got, you know, like there's something that like hits them personally because it's their diet and their, that there isn't, I think, that particular problem with the LGBT movement that I can think of. And, you know, I don't know if this really would make a strategy difference, but I'm wondering if you think that like that would kind of come into play. Should we maybe in some ways relate cows and chickens and pigs to cats, dogs, apes, all these animals that people do care about, because they're still kind of stuck behind on this, like, but I'm using, you know, like there's, I don't know, I wonder if there needs to be a step in between to even get people on board with recognizing that cats and dogs and pigs and chickens are not so different. I don't know if you have any thoughts on it.
So I think one of the issues that I think you're totally spot on in pointing out the fact that a lot of different, I mean, basically all animals that aren't companion animals are commodities, right? And so food commodities, clothing commodities, entertainment commodities, all that kind of stuff. And so I think that, and that's not the case with a lot of LGBT people. I think that there are certain, you know, there are certain types of LGBT people who are still treated as commodities, but for the most part, no. And so I think that it's really kind of, I guess one of the reasons that I am opposed to this idea of showing and animal rights activists showing all of this use of violence against non-human animals is because it perpetuates that commodification process. And so if we can actually connect with these animals on an individual level and show them in sanctuaries and show them with their friends and talk about how, like in the image of the cow that I showed at the end of the presentation was actually a couple, I think maybe a year old, and he leaped off of a truck and he actually broke his brother out of that truck too, and then they lived on the sanctuary for many years. And that's just such an amazing story, and it really shows their thirst for, their thirst for liberation and living freely with their loved ones. And I think that that is something that really breaks them down as not commodities, because it just shows their will to live, and I think that's maybe one of the things that we could try and work on is showing them as individuals, not showing them as commodities by showing the violence again. I don't know, does that...
Thank you. I mean, I guess I'm saying this is somebody who said a lot like, look at this calf, or look at this pig, he's just like your dog, and just like, so now I'm kind of really thinking a lot about what you said.
But
so
I think that that's effective too, because if we're talking about why is a dog like, what is special about a dog, and the fact that, they're having these amazing relationships with people and with other dogs, I think that if we show how, pigs can also have relationships with, and I'm sorry, I seem to be using people to mean humans. So, showing relationships between pigs and humans and pigs and other pigs in the ways that people already relate to dogs as companions and not as commodities.
I also wanted to add, sorry if I could just add one thing too. That was something that I really thought about in your presentation, when you mentioned empowered stories. And I think if you look at the most privileged groups or classes of people in our society, they're generally not presented or in narratives of oppression, victimization. They're empowered, right? And so I think if we want to have all peoples, whether human or non-human, I think if we need to start working on those empowering stories. How do we frame them as not being tortured or victim, but as being agents and individuals and with full bodies? So even something like fish. Fish are social creatures. Showing a fish living its life and showing it as being a person rather than this thing that kind of just reacts to the natural environment, I think is part of that change. Not saying, oh, fish are just like people, but fish are just like your dog, but fish are people that do things when they want to and when they don't want to.
Mm-hmm. So, and actually, I just want to say, you all can ask each other questions as well. The questions don't just have to come from over here. And we have Adam, and then Jose, and then Bronwyn.
So, on this topic, Hannah brought up the language of similarity, and that being sometimes a dangerous place to go. And I hear that, and I would love to hear some more thoughts on, because the wanting to be safe, happy, and free is a similarity that all sentient beings share, and liking pleasure and disliking pain and suffering is also a similarity, but there are other ones that are more problematic, there's plenty. So just, I guess, kind of fleshing out things to think about, at least, there's not necessarily, I'm sure there's not just one foolproof guide on which things are okay similarities and which things aren't, but just kind of ways to think on the fringes about that, about similarities that help other humans see non-humans as individuals, or even seeing other humans as individuals worthy of respect just on that basis, versus the concerns that you guys have expressed.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because often I hear people say, well, you wouldn't kill a dog, so why would you kill a pig? Because pigs are just as intelligent as dogs. And while that's true, I don't want to kill a snail either, even though I don't have any idea how intelligent a snail is. I do volunteer work in gardening and food justice. Actually, I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think that's a very overlooked topic when we talk about veganism. We're supposed to kill snails on sight. They eat the plants. I don't want to do it. Maybe I have, an unreasonable affection for snails, but it has absolutely nothing to do with their intelligence. It has to do with the fact that this is a living, breathing being that wants to live just as much as I do. So I just carefully put them somewhere away from the plants, It's not a big deal. But I think that's important, that we should not necessarily use similarity to humans as a reason for allowing an animal to live, except in the similarity that all sentient beings have, which is a desire to live.
And I think it also, just bringing up the intelligence point, I think that the implications are a little bit scary in terms of when you think about humans, because if you're saying that an orca is worth respecting and an orca deserves freedom because the orca is intelligent, what are you saying about, first of all, about non-humans who don't share that intelligence, and also humans who maybe don't share that intelligence? And what are you saying about humans who have various types of intellectual, physical, mental health disabilities and issues? And are we valuing, for example, humans who are not as intelligent less? And are we valuing humans who can't run around, you know, who aren't able-bodied less? I think the implications are important.
Kind of continuing what Jack's talking about in terms of snails, in terms of trickle up social justice, how far down in terms of animal rights, how far down do we go? Is there, because I noticed when you're talking, you said, you know, we kind of focused on cows and kind of more charismatic animals, or things that animals that look better in, say, a billboard or something like that. Can we extend that even for, like, yeah, and you stopped kind of short at mice and chickens, and I've noticed that a lot of actors kind of stop there. Can we go down even further to say like mosquitoes or ants or creatures that are usually thought of as nuisances or things like that that aren't as charismatic? Or is it more strategically beneficial to say, to utilize the animals that are more charismatic, that are more aesthetically pleasing, or that humans can relate to more?
That's definitely that's a really interesting question, especially because, like you said, there are some animals that cause us harm, you know. Like a mosquito can cause disease to us and things like that. And so I think maybe the important thing to think about is that I believe that vegans and animal liberationists should really consider a very kind of holistic global ecology. And so if we're going to consider harming as few animals as possible, which, you know, granted, all of us are going to unintentionally harm some animals, and that's just something that we really have to live with, but we're really trying not to harm anybody that we don't need to. But it's still important to kind of think about the sort of global effects of our actions and of our purchases and of the types of structures that we engage with. So, for instance, bees I find just to be a super fascinating type of community and species and creature. And so I would not want my actions as somebody who's trying to reduce harm to harm like bees or insects or animals that I don't see, animals who live underground. And so it's important for us to kind of minimize our impact in all sorts of ways, and not by, I mean, I've often thought about the types of products that a lot of people buy. Even though they might be man-made products that don't actually incorporate the body parts or secretions of any animal, they might still be causing a lot of environmental devastation. And so we should just kind of think about our purchasing decisions and how to minimize impact. I don't know if that answers your question. I think that, you know, it is tough with the mosquitoes. I don't like being bitten either.
Well, I was actually going to answer your question. I would personally go to the bottom as far as we know in terms of what exists on the planet. And I don't know, I don't say that meaning that we should right now advocate for mosquitoes. I don't know the answer. I don't know if we should say we should do work for gradualism, or do we just go to the extreme. I think animal liberation as a movement, I think we always need people on the forefront, right? We can have the sort of moderate, like, well, you could do this for now, but always knowing that there could be one, I don't want to use the word extreme group, but a group that pushes the boundaries so that we can keep moving forward. And I think there definitely needs to be voices that say, hey, what about mosquitoes? Because if we don't have that voice, we're never even going to be able to acknowledge that that's a possibility that we could ever have. And I would agree that I would want to go down to the bottom and have some voices, some people in the movement pushing us in that direction. Whether that's the general theme of the animal movement or not, I don't know. But I think it definitely needs to be a part of the trickle-up idea. Or else we really can't move up if we're just starting in the middle, right?
Okay. So we have Bronwyn.
Oh, hi. So I had another question about the trickle up for any of you that have thoughts on it. So I've been, like, in my life, I think I've been doing the trickle up with animals for a long time, because I think that, You know, there are a lot of people who are like putting enormous amounts of their time and energy into, like, let's say rabbits or dogs or elephants or orcas, and they're very close to the idea of thinking of other animals. So I don't think, like, you know, that, you know, lifting a certain group up that's, you know, presents well, I think I've seen it so many times that's completely ineffective. So I'm always like talking about the fish and the chickens and the pigs and the cows, like the animals that I feel like are most harmed, statistically speaking. But with, you know, LGBT, I don't know exactly how to do that. So, like, I mean, one thing I do is I try to present myself. Like, I don't think I'm, like, at the top or the bottom of the spectrum. And just, you know, if I'm doing something that's, you know, just trying to be out and trying to, like, you know, answer people questions or tell them that's an inappropriate question, they need to go to Google. You know, just, like, standing up for myself, standing up for other people, and just trying to not at all think I'm going to be a good example. Say I'm going to be myself and just present myself accurately and try to not be afraid of what people think. And if people want to gossip or spread rumors about me, then that's what they're going to do, and I'm going to try and just be me. But I don't know how to do that in terms of other, like, representing. So, like, how do we, other than just representing ourselves accurately, how do we, like, help, you know, like, represent or talk about it or do the trickle up? So what am I supposed to do other than just being myself to help trickle up in terms of, like, representing LGBT or supporting?
I feel like I've spoken a lot, so everyone else wants to chime in first.
Sure. I think, yeah, in relation, well, when what her presentation, or what their presentation showed about the way that when you frame something in that this animal or this person deserves rights because they're similar to this other group that has these rights, that's disregarding the other animals or other humans who might not be as similar to the people who already have those rights, and that distances them even further from how they should be perceived as deserving also. So I think when you want to make those comparisons is to think about, am I leaving somebody out at the, like, who could be being further marginalized from this? So yeah, I think that's kind of a way to think about it.
I think it also asks the question, who is at the bottom of human society, right? I think for when we look at animals, maybe it's easier to say, well, insects, right? Because no one likes insects. I don't want to get bit by mosquitoes, or I don't like fire ants because, you know, they bite, they hurt when they bite me. But I think it's harder for humans because we don't want to. We have some hierarchies, but we don't really have an ultimate bottom, which I don't think we want to do, right? And we feel like, well, that doesn't seem right. So how do we advocate for someone who we don't know how they fall in that hierarchy? I don't have an answer, but that it does kind of ask that question. If I'm not at the bottom, who is, right? How do I advocate for someone beneath me or behind me? And then who is that person? I don't know. I think we sort of naturally try to resist that feeling. So I don't know if that's something we even need to answer, or just be aware of that you might not be the most unprivileged of people in your own lives.
I just wanted to mention, look, I do feel that within the LGBT community, we really need to elevate the voices of trans women. That's why I'm really glad that you read that statement, because there has been criticism that trans men and trans masculine non-binary people are starting to use kind of male privilege to dominate over trans women's voices, and that is a problem. So that doesn't mean that trans women are at the bottom of the hierarchy, it just means that they need to be represented. So as an ally, you can represent and help their voices come through as well.
I think, sorry, just kind of one more point on this topic. I feel like if we are to sort of think about who is marginalized and who is privileged in different communities, we have to just kind of think about all of our intersecting identities. And so, you know, we all have our gender identity and our sexual orientation and our ability status and our class privilege, education privilege, our race, language of origin, all this kind of stuff. And so all these things are kind of layered, and in each of these identities we're either privileged or targeted. And so people who have more targeted identities are the people whose voices are more marginalized. And so I think that when you think about trickle-up social justice for LGBTQ movements, you really, part of being a good ally is actually kind of stepping back and allowing the people who are more marginalized to speak for themselves. And so, you know, if you think about participating in different social justice spaces, you kind of look at the room and you think about who's in the room, who's not in the room, who's not represented on this panel, in this workshop, whose voices should we really be elevating, and then you provide them a platform and a space to be able to speak for themselves, because as humans, they actually do share language with us to be able to speak for themselves. And so in terms of being allies to non-human animals, we all are allies because we're all humans, and so we all have to communicate with other humans and center their voices and their priorities as best as we possibly can, but we can't actually know directly what they want because we only have different types of nonverbal communication and cues from them. But with humans, we can actually think about, you know, like it would have been excellent to have a trans woman of color present at this topic, and so really actively trying to pull in those voices to kind of round out elevating the voices of the people who are most marginalized, because they're often silenced.
Ideas, like, of things I was doing, and I was wanting some input, like, because I'm trying to do that and do the trickle up, like, just like speaking up. Like, people often say, like, anyone who has like sexual or romantic or gendered like deviations from societal norms, like often people make jokes and derogatory comments about prostitutes or sex workers, and just like speaking up against that and being like, look, you know, this is not something we should joke about or criticize. And then just, you know, like when, you know, hearing comments and just trying to educate myself, so when I want to intervene, like being able to know what to say that's, you know, an accurate, like basically asking someone not to say something, or and then also like including other people's voices. Like if I'm at a table and we're talking about, you know, some sort of LGBTQ plus issue, then to be like, oh, so-and-so, like, what do you think about this? So like just encouraging people who may feel less sure to speak, or staying silent myself when I want to give other people space to talk. Does anyone have any other practical things to do, or any criticism or of what I said?
I would add looking at people who are presenting themselves as voices representing their particular experience. So Janet Mock is one amazing woman. She just came out with a book. Redefining Realist. She's a trans woman of color, and so speaking from your own experience is always important. But I think also being able to point and say, hey, you know, you should check out so and so. I'm actually going to not tell you to use Google because Google's kind of problematic. So I would say there are some other options there. DuckDuckGo, so it's kind of easy to remember. DuckDuckGo it. So that has to do with privacy issues and tracking and whatnot. But that's a really good organization, just as a side note. But yeah, I would go to the internet and look for people, if you don't already know them, who are some good voices that are acknowledging, like, yeah, I'm willing to share my story about this particular identity aspect of mine, so that you don't have to speak for yourself, speak on behalf of other people, but say, hey, so-and-so talks about this, so-and-so is, you know, a trans woman sex worker, so maybe you should check out some of her work. Maybe paraphrase some of what they say, but so they know what you're talking about, but then point to actual individuals who are presenting themselves as voices for their identity. That's what I would recommend. I don't know about the rest of you. Oh,
I was just going to say, and also just realize we're all speaking from our own experiences, so I don't represent the transsexual male or agender experience. I represent my experience. Other people who have either of those identities will not necessarily agree with anything I've said today. You know, I have no credentials. I'm not an academic. I'm just, you know, a guy. Well, agender, I guess. You know, see, sometimes I just slip and just start using, you know, masculine terms because it's easier. But you know, I like to think about that because it's important. But yeah, just don't assume that anybody is going to be the authority on anything when it comes to LGBTQ, because there's very little agreement on a lot of these topics.
So first thing is just, you know, a little point that if you want to go down, you know, to the lowest levels of sentience you can find, right, you can go a lot lower than insects, right? Mosquitoes have tens of thousands of neurons. You know, you can go farther down to C. elegans, which is a tiny sea worm with 387. And then you can go to, you know, neural nets, which is simulated on people's computers. And it's really hard to say going all the way down, because then we have to ask if thermostats and fridges have rights, which I think is kind of plausible under some of those assumptions. So that's a dangerous place to go, is just my point. Actual question. So with with a lot of this, right, we've got the question of the trickle down versus the trickle up. If we try to do things trickle down, then it might plausibly be easier to get the actual changes which you're trying to get implemented through. So maybe it's easier to get same-sex marriage if we present same-sex marriage as like a typical thing which, everyone who's gay wants, right? And we give all these, really traditional images of, couples, like long-term traditional couples who just happen to be gay. And maybe that's an easier way of getting the same-sex marriage through. So that's advantageous only if the actual goal of the movement is to get same-sex marriage as opposed to, achieving some broader kind of equality. Same thing with non-human animals. If we manage to use really cute pictures of cows or whatever to convince people that we should care about cows, and then we get laws which make it illegal to, have various kinds of factory farms, and that helps chickens, then those laws, because we aimed them at the easiest to sympathize with members of that group, help everyone in the group. And so is part of the question, when you're talking about trickle down versus trickle up, how much the things you say you're trying to advocate for are actually the end game versus how much they're just a part of what you're trying to go for. So, like, you see what I'm saying? No matter how privileged the people who you use for getting same-sex marriage passed are, if you get same-sex marriage passed, that's presumably going to help the people who want it. And the question is, how much are those kind of reforms actually what you're trying to do?
I guess it presumes that same-sex marriage is the goal, right, rather than a process.
So I think one way you could look at it is where framing it that way, it's that gay marriage is something that should be elevated to the status of hetero marriage, which is something that is considered to be like a good thing that's like an elevated status. But if you take it from a different direction, that, well, why is it considered so special and so something that should be elevated above the rest? Why can't it just be like one type of relationship that can be valid like any other? So take away the special value that is ascribed to that particular marriage. Look at challenge the value that is placed on the thing that's considered higher value, as opposed to only elevating things that are not considered to be as valuable. Sorry if that didn't make sense. Well, is there something I should clarify from that?
Well, it reminded me that, same-sex marriage doesn't help people who are single and choose to remain single.
Yeah.
It doesn't help people who are poly, right?
That's what I was trying to get at.
But
Yeah.
poly people do get married too.
Yeah.
Right, but it doesn't recognize
poly.
Right, that's what I meant to say. It doesn't
right,
help people who want to have their poly
multiple
relationships
spouses, right.
recognized.
It does help with the ones who aren't, though, and that's a lot of them. That's like the majority. And so I'm just interested in the question of whether you think that in these things we tend to be trying to fight for the things which are explicitly what we're fighting for. So whether when we advocate same-sex marriage, we're actually advocating same-sex marriage, or whether you're just trying to fight for a more general movement, which that is like a stepping stone on. This is the DXE house, so I'm not actually surprised that everyone seems to be making noises which imply that they reckon we should be going all the way and little stepping stones mean nothing.
Just speaking as someone who's been active, I've gone to a lot of same-sex marriage rallies. I took pictures, for years at all the Prop 8 events, the sit-ins at City Hall. And this was before my transition, so I was legally married to someone of the so-called opposite sex. Now I am in the so-called same-sex marriage, so it's kind of interesting how that worked out. But the way I saw it is, yes, marriage is certainly only the tip of the iceberg as far as, gay rights. But I saw it as, if you're not going to grant someone the legal right to marry somebody that they love, then they're not a person. That's just basic. I can't imagine, people, mostly conservatives, I guess, were just saying, oh, well, this goes too far. We respect you, but we're not going to grant you that. That's kind of like saying, oh, well, it goes too far to not kill an animal. We're just going to respect the animal and respectfully kill the animal. We're still going to kill the animal. It's the same thing. So I think that, maybe it could be seen as a single issue campaign to get same-sex marriage, but it's just so necessary. Because if you tell somebody that they're not worthy of marrying someone they love, then they're not even a citizen, really, as far as I see it. That's just my opinion.
We have Mike.
I guess kind of related, actually, kind of responding to both. So you utilitarianism earlier, and so for me, like there's a thing you can work for that might have some amount of trickle down. I'm going to be using kind of a straight kind of thing, but that's not obviously what it is. But let's say you can work for a particular goal, and it can trickle down like a couple steps. Like you get same-sex marriage, and that has a slightly greater effect. Or you could work on something below that targets like a group that's heavily marginalized, and it has a kind of, in a way, a broader effect because it's low, it naturally subsumes those above it. But I think the kind of point that you bring up is about this, even though this is not a zero-sum game, there is a limited amount of energy you can expand in each individual time frame. The question sometimes, and to me one of the key things about trickle up versus trickle down, is sometimes when you use a trickle down approach, it will limit your pathways in the future. So even though like you might have achieved a goal with less energy sooner, perhaps you created a bigger barrier of marginalization to include these other groups into what you work for. Sometimes it's not the case. Sometimes it is in fact a great step on the way, and is in fact and it's hard to evaluate what's a good use of energy for particular time frames. That's kind of what I think about it.
So I just want to make an observation, or actually two discussions going on here. So one is the discussion of trickle down and trickle up as two utilitarian approaches, right? In which case, my opinion is we need both. Because the first one is based on comparison. Comparison is basically a quantizing process. You're not recognizing an individual as an individual. You're making a metaphor. And that can be useful when you think about other creatures, but that's sympathy. The word sympathy was mentioned, but there was no distinction made today about the differences between sympathy and empathy. So the first approach, trickling down, is based on sympathy. But then we also have to recognize basically every individual is an individual, right? That's the first meaning for people, the word people. People doesn't mean human, it means an individual, right? So we also need the second kind of thinking, which is not metaphoric, which is not based on comparison, which is not saying we shouldn't kill that individual because that individual reminds me of me, which is so self-centered. We also need the other way of thinking, which is that individual is an individual on that individual's own right. It may not resemble us much, but that is an individual, right? So I'm just trying to point out there are two different discussions going on here. Practically speaking, both approaches are necessary, in my opinion. In terms of the thinking behind it, I think we have to recognize the second thinking, trickling up, is based on something that's unrelated to the first form of thinking. That's my point.
Sorry, to clarify, you said the trickle up is not related to trickle down?
You can see them as very separate ways of thinking, because the first one is based on comparison. It's metaphoric. Second one is more metonymic, meaning it's based on the thing on its own. The thing here meaning individual. You don't have to make any comparisons whatsoever at all.
So are you saying that trickle down is I should respect this other individual because this individual is like me, and then trickle up is this individual deserves to live, based on its own merits and not because of a relationship to me?
That's my way of seeing those two approaches right now.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
I think that makes sense to you at all.
Mm-hmm. But just in terms of utilizing for non-human animals using the pronouns, I think perhaps you mentioned using he or she. What are those kind of derived from? Like we've spoken before about what you would use. Because then you mentioned kind of simplifying it by just simply using he or she. Is that based on just say like biological organs, or just kind of there's no. It's not as in humans. They don't have necessarily kind of definitions of sexual identity or expression. So like, what do we derive those, or should we just use they and as a general?
Well, again, this is just my suggestion, and because I've gotten feedback, since I posted a blog that was related to my talk, and people have brought this up and said, we don't assign pronouns to people based on their anatomy, or what we do, but we shouldn't. We should assign it based on identity. But we can't ask a non-human animal what their experience of gender identity is. So if we're going to assign a gendered pronoun, such as she or he, all we can go on is the anatomy. And that's unfortunate, but I still think that that's preferable than using it. And I think it's also useful. I mean, for example, I forgot to mention this during the slide with Snow, the chicken, but Kelly, Snow's guardian, had mentioned when she posted her photo on Facebook that a lot of people don't realize that chickens have combs, the red part on the head. Some people think that only roosters have that. So in this case, getting to know the sex of an animal shows them more as individuals, because if we can get to know animals better and know the difference between a male and a female of a species when it is obvious, it's not always obvious, then that's just a way that we can get to know them better. So it's an imperfect compromise, but I just think that it's way better than using it.
I completely agree about not using it, but I guess my concern is just that using that for non-human animals reinforces that same mindset for in terms of using pronouns for humans.
You could use they. I mean, no, I see where you're getting at. I just think that at this point in time, they is so misunderstood as a human pronoun because so few of us request it, that using they for a non-human animal might be seen in the same realm as it. It might be seen as objectifying. I mean, I don't feel objectified being called they because I'm requesting that, but some people have actually questioned me on that. They're saying, well, I don't want to call you they because that doesn't sound very personal to me.
If I could just jump in there, as someone, when you're doing rescue work, knowing the physical anatomy of the animal is often very important. Just like there's certain species of animals, chickens and roosters are actually one of them, where you really need to know whether it's a rooster or a chicken, just to know whether you can take them, for example, and who they're appropriately placed in a room with. Because if you put two roosters in the same room in a tight space, good chance you're going to have a fight, and that will lead to physical injury. So there is some relevant information that if there aren't problematic gender dynamics that we're reinforcing with like using she and he, like personally as someone who's done a lot of rescue work, that's one of the first questions I always ask, because it just, and it's the same is true of dogs. Like I have two female dogs. If Lisa's a male, it'd be a very different dynamic, and I have to be careful about that. So just something to observe that we don't think about this as much because we're human animals, but non-human animals have different dynamics and social interactions sometimes that lead to harm.
No, that's a good point.
Yeah,
and I think, I mean, we can treat animals with respect even if we were treating them differently than we would treat humans with respect. You see what I mean? I mean, since most humans can express their gender identity and tell you what pronouns, you should respect that. Animals can't do that, but we can still respect them even while assigning a gender to them because, as Wayne pointed out, there might be useful times when we need to know the sex of that animal. So that, again, kind of gets you to know them more as individuals rather than just objects. Like I put in my blog, I said it is for cars or paper clips, not people. Animals are people.
Just in terms of like identifying the, with pronouns for like chickens and cows specifically, I think that there's or any animal that is used for milk and or eggs, I think there's a really important point to noting the fact that the oppression that these animals go through is based on their physical sex. And I think that there is actually there's sex-based oppression that goes on here that's worth noting. And so whenever I'm talking about or for male chicks that get, tossed in, a dumpster, I think there's a really good point of mentioning the specific sex of these animals because it is still oppressing a group, based on their body. So I think that there's some space to mention that in this context. I just want to point that out.
That's a good point. I do completely agree that it's completely important to think. My issue is just kind of the question of whether we should utilize those pronouns to identify with those sex or gender. Like that is to say that, okay, well, like they have these biological components, so therefore they have these pronouns. And I think that, and to differentiate between humans and non-human animals is in a sense kind of speciesist. Like it's to say that, well, we can use it for us, but like here's well,
Well, what would be your alternative suggestion?
I have
I'm asking sincerely because I would like to have other options, but I don't have a good one yet.
I don't know if this is the best. I know there's issues with analogizing with things, but maybe looking at it in terms of the non-discussion really that we have in terms of race, the idea we want to be colorblind, right? As a society, we don't want to treat people or mistreat people based on their color. But if we eliminate the language that we use to talk about differences, I don't think we're going to get to that point. Some people everyone might not agree with me, but I'm of the opinion that try to act colorblind now when we're not is not going to actually be beneficial to the people. And I think if we acknowledge that talking about gender in a human supremacist society and applying those to animals, we're not in an equal society yet, and we recognize the fact that it's problematic, but we kind of need to use the language that we have right now in order to kind of work with the system that we have, acknowledging that it is problematic and we would like to move beyond that at some point. I don't know if that's helpful for people, but that's kind of how I see it.
How?
How?
If we keep using these
things. Well, if we can't get to a point where where we still can't see animals as people, I don't know if we can ever get to a point where we see them as people that can live as beings, right? If we're not using chickens and roosters as objects, we wouldn't need to care about their gender necessarily because we're not rescuing them, right? So we're not in that situation where, all right, I can't put two roosters together because I'm rescuing them. The roosters are going to be living their lives and taking care of themselves because they're not commodities anymore. That's kind of how I see it. And I think as we get closer to personifying animals, then we can have, I think, richer discussions. We're just so limited right now because they just don't have any personhood in our society.
I think I'm going to call it. I know we have some more questions. I know some speakers said that they would accept later questions. And you can also probably post questions. Not probably. You can post questions on the Facebook page, and we can continue to have a discussion there. And thank you all for coming. If it's all right with you all, I would like to show one short video, and if it's okay, another very, very short video. Do you mind cueing it on your phone? But I'd really like to thank our speakers. You all did a very wonderful job. Thank you.